Hi, my name is Megan DeLong. I'm an environmental health specialist with the Arkansas Department of Health. I'm happy to be here and thank the Little Rock chapter of the Moms Rising organization for having me. Today, I will be presenting on vaccinations for children. The purpose of today's presentation is to gather a basic understanding of the definition and differences between vaccine, vaccination, and immunization. We will then discuss the importance of your children receiving their vaccinations, why it's truly so imperative, and why it's also a necessary school requirement. I will review the recommended vaccinations by age group and then cover how a vaccine is tested. Lastly, we will discuss the potential adverse reactions from your children receiving their vaccinations. So, let's begin. As mothers, especially if you're a first-time parent, it's easy to get overwhelmed with everything you need to know for your child. So I can see how it's nerve-wracking to ask your child's pediatrician, "What is a vaccine?" Right? Because the community has this general concept of what a vaccine, vaccination, and immunization is, which is great. But unfortunately, even though these words are common in the community, they're not always explained or broken down. So I want to break down and differentiate these terms to ensure it's not jargon for you. So let's start off by answering, what is a vaccine? Well, a vaccine is a substance that contains small amounts of weak or dead germs that can cause a disease, whereas a vaccination is the actual process of getting the vaccine. So your children receive the vaccine by getting their shots or vaccinations. So in this case, shots and vaccinations can be used interchangeably. Now, immunization is becoming immune or protected from a particular disease. And this can happen one of two ways, either through natural infection or through the process of receiving a vaccination. As mentioned, our bodies can become immune from either natural infection or through the process of receiving a vaccination. I want to very briefly explain how our body's immune system works so that way you can understand how a vaccine works. So germs like bacteria or viruses invade our body. They attack and multiply in number. The invasion, or otherwise known as an infection, is what causes the illness. Our immune system then uses many tools in our body to fight the infection. Now, if this is the first time our body is introduced to this particular germ, however, it may take many days for our body to fully fight it off. After the infection, our immune system remembers what it learned about how to protect our bodies if we encounter the same germ or bacteria again in the future. Now that you know how our body fights off illness, let's touch base on how a vaccine works so you can comprehend what is happening to your child when they receive their vaccination. So a vaccine helps develop immunity by imitating the infection without the illness that comes along with getting an infection naturally. Please note, however, there is a possibility for this imitation infection to cause some minor symptoms in your child, like a fever, but the CDC has stated that vaccines greatly reduce the risk of infection by concurrently working with the body's natural defenses to safely develop immunity to disease. So in this slide, I provided a diagram just to visually represent what has been stated so far, and that is immunity comes from one of two ways, either through natural infection or through a vaccination, which is considered relatively low risk in comparison to the health effects caused by natural infection. Also, do remember when your children receive their vaccinations, they will not endure the illness. We now have this basic understanding of how our immune system and vaccines work, and at this point, you may still be wondering, well, why is it so important to vaccinate my child or my children? Well, there are many reasons that you should vaccinate your children, and I'm only going to focus on a few today just due to time constraints of our presentation. The American Academy of Family Physicians believes that immunization is essential to preventing the spread of contagious diseases. So that kind of leads us into our next point, that immunizations can save your child's life. And this is because when your child receives their vaccinations, I should say, they can be protected from vaccine-preventable diseases. Our next point will be that immunization protects others you care about. And this is something important to touch base on. If your children aren't vaccinated, they can spread a disease to other children who are too young to be vaccinated, or people who have weakened immune systems, such as transplant recipients, people with cancer, or the elderly. Children not vaccinated definitely put others at risk. Immunizations can save your family time and money. Most schools and child care facilities require your children to have their vaccines prior to enrolling. So not having child care can put a strain on your career. And additionally, it's also important to note that vaccine-preventable diseases are incredibly expensive to treat. And lastly, immunization protects future generations. This is a super important reason to vaccinate your children, as vaccines have reduced and in some cases eliminated many diseases that killed or severely disabled people. And so an example of this would be the smallpox vaccination eradicated a disease worldwide. It no longer exists because of children being vaccinated. So if you all, as parents, continue to fully vaccinate your children, then parents in the future may be able to trust that some of the current diseases may no longer be a possibility to harm or threat their children. So on this slide, I have listed 14 vaccine-preventable diseases. And in parentheses, you'll notice that I've also listed the vaccine that prevents that particular disease. Now, I won't go into specifics of each disease and the accompanying vaccines, but I did want to make you aware of the many dangers that can be prevented by simply having your children vaccinated. This is the recommended immunization schedule for children aged birth to 6 years old. I retrieved this document directly from the CDC's website in case you want to review this information in a larger format, but I've also included this pamphlet in the folder you received at the beginning of the presentation. I do want to point out, though, that this recommended schedule provided by the CDC, they've shaded some vaccines in yellow, and that's just to indicate the vaccine could be given during that specific age range. And here you will see the recommended immunization schedule for children ages 7 to 18 years old. And again, same thing like the other slide, I did pull this directly from the CDC website, and you do have this in the folders you received at the beginning of the presentation. So again, let me point out some key facts regarding this particular schedule. The green shaded boxes indicate when the vaccine is recommended for all children. So you'll notice that the flu vaccine is recommended for children every single year. The orange boxes indicate when a vaccine should be given if a child is catching up on mixed vaccines. And with that, I do recommend you actually speaking to your child's doctor just to see what the best schedule will be going forward for them to catch up on all of their vaccinations. The purple shaded boxes indicate the vaccine is recommended for children with certain health or lifestyle conditions that put them at an increased risk for that disease. And then the last shaded box, that blue color, indicates children that are not at an increased risk may receive the vaccine after speaking to their doctor, of course. Not known to many people is that a vaccine is thoroughly tested to ensure that it is safe prior to releasing it to the public. There are specific protocols in place to reach the safety standards that have been set by the FDA. And the early stages of vaccine testing, like the very initial stages, actually include quite extensive research that may take course over several years. After the extensive research has been completed and the vaccine is ready to be tested on people, then it moves into what is known as clinical studies, which is split into 3 different phases. And this is going to all be tested on human subjects. And do note, though, that when a vaccine is initially tested, they always test on adults first, especially if it's a vaccine that's geared towards children. Phase 1 of the clinical studies is tested in about 20 to 100 different volunteers with the goal to assess the safety of the vaccine and also to determine the type and extent of an immune response that the vaccine initiates in an individual. If phase 1 is successful, then we move on to phase 2. And phase 2 has several hundred volunteers, in which during this particular phase, researchers are hoping to answer the questions of what are the most common short-term side effects and how are volunteers' immune systems responding to the vaccine. The final phase, phase 3 of the clinical studies, includes testing on hundreds or even thousands of people, and researchers hope to answer the questions of how do people who get the vaccine and people who do not get the vaccine compare? Is this vaccine even effective? Is it safe? What are the common side effects that these people are experiencing? So after this final phase 3 is completed and the researchers have gathered the information they needed, then they'll go ahead and submit the vaccine to be approved by the FDA. And FDA licenses or approves a vaccine only if it's safe and effective and only if the benefits truly outweigh the risks. And then something I didn't add on this particular slide is that a vaccine actually continues to be monitored. So the FDA and CDC are always monitoring the vaccines after the public begins to use it. Lately, there has been a lot of controversy as to whether vaccines are truly safe for children, and they most certainly are. As mentioned earlier, vaccines do go through thorough and extensive testing prior to being introduced to the public. However, like with any medication, there is a potential for a child to experience adverse side effects after receiving their vaccine. Now, if a side effect does occur in a child, the symptoms are usually relatively minor, and symptoms such as pain, swelling, and fever subside within a few days. A child may experience an allergic reaction to the vaccine, and it can potentially cause seizures and be disabling, and I'll get to that a little bit more in depth in our next slide. There have been rare cases reported from individuals, both children and adults, who were injured after receiving a vaccine, and they experienced injuries such as allergic reactions, pain or loss of function in the nerves, shoulder injuries at the site of injections, brain inflammation, and even fainting. Now, I know as a parent, it's super scary to hear, but I want to ensure all of you are aware that there are rare cases of vaccine damage. Again, remember, vaccines, like any medications, can cause side effects, but vaccines do save lives by preventing disease. And if there are side effects from vaccines, they're very rare and mild. I've listed the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program at the bottom because if you feel that your child was injured as a result of receiving a vaccine, then you do have the option of contacting them to resolve a vaccine injury-related problem. So let's discuss really quickly what we've gone over today. We discussed the differences between vaccine, vaccination, and immunization, and we learned how a vaccine imitates an infection and works together with the immune system to help our bodies build this immunity, which of course immunity comes either from a natural infection or by receiving a vaccine. Do you remember the importance of your children receiving their vaccines, not only for their health, but for everyone around them? There is a recommended immunization schedule for your children, and should you have any additional questions, I do urge you to go ahead and speak to your child's primary care physician. Vaccines are thoroughly tested to ensure their safety and effectiveness when given to an individual. And lastly, we did briefly cover some potential adverse reactions your child may receive after getting their vaccinations. I have provided my references should you wish to do additional research on your own. Thank you again to the Little Rock chapter of the Moms Rising organization for having me. I really hope I was able to address any questions or concerns you may have had regarding your children receiving their vaccinations. If not, I have provided my contact information here, so feel free to reach out and connect with me, or of course you can contact your primary care physician to address any other questions you may have. Thank you, and y'all have a great day.